Chapter 1. Environmentally Friendly Burgers. Lily Singer wished she could simply say her date was going badly and leave it at that. But such a gross understatement was against her nature. To be accurate, she would have to admit it was in the top 5 worst, if not the top 3. This wasn't totally unexpected. Most, actually all, of her dates were men she'd met online who, inevitably, weren't as cute as their profile pictures suggested. Awkward and bookish, she found it much easier to start virtual as opposed to real conversations. Speed dating and blind dates were out of the question due to her abysmal social skills. Well, that, and the fact that she was a wizard. No, not a witch, a wizard. So, when you said you had diet restrictions, what you meant was you could only eat burgers? Lily asked, trying to keep the sarcasm out of her voice. Though she suspected the only way her date would notice sarcasm was if it was dressed up like a cheeseburger.
Huh?
Jerry Slate, a good 100 pounds larger and 10 years older than his profile picture suggested, looked up from his second burger to stare confused at her face. When we were setting up the date, you asked if you could pick the restaurant because you said you had diet restrictions, Lily reminded him.
Oh, yeah. I have a sensitive stomach, and I can only eat 100% pure beef burgers. And they have to be grass-fed. Free range, you know. None of that GMO stuff. This place uses the best ingredients out there.
Lily resisted the urge to roll her eyes, consoling herself with the thought that it was better to be taken to a gourmet, environmentally friendly burger restaurant than, heaven forbid, a normal burger restaurant. Looking to the side, she gazed longingly through the restaurant's front windows to the sunlit street, busy with lunchtime traffic. If only she knew how to teleport. She could escape this awkward situation with minimal embarrassment. So, she tried again, how's your gaming campaign going?
Oh, fantastic.
Jerry enthused past a mouthful of half-chewed, but let's not forget, grass-fed burger. Not slowing his consumption of burger, fries, and a handmade root beer float, he launched into a detailed description of his gaming group's latest campaign against someone. Lily couldn't remember who. It was a topic she could safely rely on to keep him talking for a good while, though it bored her almost to tears. Boredom was preferable, however, to the awkward silence interspersed with chewing sounds she'd suffered through for the first half of their date. Funny, she'd thought that, in person, Jerry would be more inquisitive. That was before she'd been aware of his burger obsession. As she absent-mindedly separated the carrot coins from the rest of her salad and stacked them into a tiny walled fortress between her and her droning date, she realized he hadn't asked her a single question beyond the perfunctory, "How are you?" since they'd met outside some 20 minutes before. From the time they'd entered the restaurant, his entire attention had been devoted to ordering and eating, though he had, at least, disengaged a few brain cells long enough to inform her of the best items on the menu. Come to think of it, he hadn't been very inquisitive online either, but Lily was good at asking questions through virtual chat. It was like doing research in a search engine. Type in a question, then browse through the resultant dump of information to find your answer. When asked a question, especially if said question had anything to do with himself, Jerry was obligingly verbose. He went into great detail, as long as that detail involved the 100 different titles in his grunge rock music collection, or his daring feats in the latest sneak attack against his group's unsuspecting, now no longer allies. It wasn't as if she'd had soaring expectations. She just hoped for some intelligent conversation about, say, books, or history, or philosophy, or anything that mattered, really. Some people improved upon face-to-face acquaintance. Jerry was not one of them. Neither was she, come to think of it. But she, at least, didn't bore anyone with loving descriptions of each book in her expansive personal library unless she knew, for a fact, that that person was a bibliophile. Hands nervously smoothing down the dark fabric of her pencil skirt, she cast about desperately for an excuse to prematurely end the date. She intended to block Jerry Slate from her dating profile as soon as she got home. Ignoring the gaming babble coming from the other side of the table, Lily concentrated on the fork she held in her hand as an idea came to her. She whispered the words for a simple heat transference spell, her other hand wrapped around the power anchor amulet she wore tied to her wrist like a bracelet. Her body heat began to seep into the piece of metal, making it grow warm as she grew cooler. When she judged it was sufficiently hot, she made a startled gesture, dropping it dramatically onto the table as she jerked back in her chair. "Ouch!" she yelped.
Huh?
Jerry said, stopping mid-sentence. It seemed to be his favorite word, along with "oh." "I wasn't paying attention and tried to pick up my fork. It's very hot. It burned my hand." They must have just washed it in an industrial washer. Jerry reached forward to touch the fork experimentally, hands stopping short as he felt the heat emanating from the offending utensil.
Gosh, that is hot. Are you okay? You don't look so good.
Jerry's brow furrowed in confusion. Not even he was absent-minded enough to miss the fact that their silverware had been sitting, quite cool and harmless, for a good 15 minutes since they'd gotten there. Lily made a show of feeling her forehead, hoping to redirect his attention. "I feel all clammy. I should probably go home. I could be getting sick. Thanks so much for the food." With a touch of guilt, she fled the restaurant, not looking back. If she had, she would have felt better. Jerry's momentarily stunned face quickly smoothed over as he noticed the untouched burger at her place and, not wanting to waste food, began demolishing it as well. The warm summer air felt good on her face as Lily drove her Honda Civic down Ponce de Leon Avenue, heading back to Agnes Scott College campus. Her soft, chestnut-brown hair frizzed in the humidity, despite being pulled back into a severe bun. At least it wasn't whipping around on her face and getting stuck in her glasses, as it would have been had she worn it down. Verdant foliage and colorful flowers crowded around the sidewalks, businesses, and houses lining the street. The abundant plant life was one of the things Lily loved most about Atlanta. It made the place feel less like a big city and more like a well-tended neighborhood. Plus, it reminded her of home in the Alabama backwaters. Pulling into the college's employee parking lot, Lily gathered her things and headed across campus toward McCain Library. Though originally founded as an elementary school in 1889, Agnes Scott had become a college by the early 1900s. McCain Library, built in 1936, consisted of 4 main floors, a grand vault-ceilinged reading hall, and 3 attached floors dedicated to the stacks. It was a beautiful example of Gothic architecture meeting utilitarian building needs and, along with the other Gothic and Victorian red and brickstone buildings around campus, made for a beautiful and relaxing atmosphere. Though it was Saturday, Lily preferred to take refuge in the library and bury herself in paperwork rather than go home and risk the urge to mope about. The tall ceilings, majestic architecture, and quiet atmosphere would calm her in a way no amount of tea or chocolate could. And, of course, there was the comforting smell of books. She passed a few groups of girls relaxing or studying on the green. It was a women's college, and non-employee males were discouraged from hanging around campus. On this sunny day, the blue sky and warm grass had lured most students outside to study, so she saw only a few scattered girls working quietly in the library's grand reading hall as she made her way to her office. Her office was a spacious room on the first floor, with a high ceiling and expansive windows. Tall bookshelves covered most of the other 3 walls, and a large mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. With a sigh, she dropped the purse onto one of the 2 visitors' chairs, both currently pushed up against her bookshelves as stepladders, and sat down at her desk. The desk's dark wood surface was polished to a shine, and each item on it was arranged neatly. Her computer, pencil holder, and file organizer were placed just so, clean, spotless, and free of dust. Her shiny brass nameplate was centered and aligned perfectly parallel to the edge of her desk. It read, Lillian Singer, Administrative Coordinator, Archives Manager. It was a prestigious position for Lily's relatively young 25 years of age. But the fact that the previous archives manager, Madame Barrington, had taken Lily under her wing and personally groomed her for the job had made Lily the obvious choice when Madame Barrington retired a year ago. Beyond the Madame's training and endorsement, however, Lily had been well prepared for the job. With 4 years of undergraduate work-study in the stacks, not to mention 2 years as head librarian after graduation, her BA in history and minor in classics were just icing on the cake. Of course, Lily's love of books, organized nature, and library experience weren't the only reasons behind Madame Barrington's choice. The real reason was she'd needed someone to take over as curator of the basement, a secret archive beneath the McCain Library containing a private collection of occult books on magic, wizardry, and arcane science. Being a wizard herself, Madame Barrington had recognized Lily's innate ability soon after she'd begun her freshman year. The older woman had considered it her duty to keep the then young and inexperienced girl's insatiable curiosity from getting her killed. Madame Barrington had always been frustratingly vague about exactly who owned the books. Her job, and now Lily's, was to care for them, study them, and act as gatekeeper to their knowledge. Only once had Lily seen Madame Barrington allow access, and that was to a very old gentleman who'd arrived late one night and whispered something in the Madame's ear. When Lily had asked how she would know to let someone in, Madame Barrington simply smiled her mysterious smile and said, "You'll know." Lily's worries had faded over time, as not a single person had ever appeared requesting access in the years since she'd taken over. Though the Madame was tight-lipped on the subject, Lily got the impression that there weren't many wizards left in the world. Of those who did still exist, only a select few knew of the basement's whereabouts. That was fine with Lily, as the basement was her own personal heaven. Knowledge was the next best thing to life itself, and knowledge of the unknown and mysterious was something she'd craved ever since she could remember. Long before she had found out she was a wizard and started learning the craft under Madame Barrington's tutelage. That thirst got her into trouble on some occasions, but just as often it resulted in exciting discoveries which added to her already encyclopedic mind. Having all of Agnes Scott's stacks, archives, and considerable online research capability at her fingertips was a dream come true, not even counting the basement. Now, having settled into her leather desk chair in the sunlit office, Lily relished a moment of glowing satisfaction as she surveyed her domain. Taking a deep breath, she let the disappointment and frustration of an abysmal date fade away, refocusing instead on all the good things in life. Books, tea, chocolate, cats, more books. Who cared about men and dating when you had all that at your fingertips? Speaking of men, there was a flourishing knock on her office door, and without waiting for an answer, a tall, lanky man with mussed brown hair came swaggering through. His untucked shirt and worn pants gave him a disheveled look, though he walked as if he wore the finest Italian suit in all the world. On a leather cord around his neck hung a triangular stone with a hole in the middle. She'd always wondered what it was, but wasn't one to ask personal questions. His grand entrance was marred slightly by the absence of her visitor chairs in front of her desk, which interrupted his smooth transition from swaggering in to lounging handsomely across one of them. Instead, he had to reverse direction and pull a chair over from a bookshelf before settling his lanky form into it. Lily hid a smile, trying to look stern instead. "Sebastian, how many times do I have to tell you? You're not supposed to be wandering around campus. This is a women's college and private property."
Oh, pish.
Sebastian waved a hand unconcernedly.
If you're so worried about it, call security.
His eyes were bright with mischief. As if to emphasize his complete lack of concern, he reached into his pocket and drew out that silly coin he was always playing with. He liked to roll it over his knuckles and perform other sleights of hand, knowing it annoyed her when he showed off. Lily rolled her eyes. She knew that she wouldn't call security. At least not until he'd annoyed her to the point of losing her temper, which wasn't often. "And to what do I owe the pleasure of your visit?" Chin propped in the palm of her hand, Lily raised a skeptical eyebrow in his direction and did her best to ignore the coin. Unlike most men, he picked up on sarcasm like a child picked up candy, every time and with great glee.
"Oh, just paying a social visit. It's been far too long, don't you think? How's the old biddy doing these days?"
Lily's eyes narrowed. Sebastian practically oozed casual nonchalance, which meant he was up to something. "I'd like to hear you call her that to her face. And your great-aunt is just fine. The last time I visited her, she was enjoying a day in the garden."
"Still kicking, eh?"
Sebastian snorted, twirling a bit of his bangs around one finger.
"Far be it for the great Madame Barrington to grow old and die like the rest of us."
Lily frowned. "That's quite disrespectful. You know very well that wizards tend to live longer than everyone else. If you're going to insult my mentor, at least have the decency to do it behind my back." Sebastian laughed, making a dismissive gesture.
"Lighten up, Lily. It was just a joke. She did disown me, after all. I'd say that at least gives me the right to make jokes about her."
Unlike his great-aunt, Sebastian Blackwell was a witch. No, not a wizard, a witch. The difference came from the source of their power. A wizard's was innate, cultivated through discipline and study, channeled and shaped by will and word, often supplemented by a collection of arcane objects. A witch's was entirely acquired through the delicate art of give and take. Many beings, spirits, demons, and magical creatures, were happy to give aid or favors to the right person in exchange for the right thing. Others could be tricked, a few could be forced, and some were to be avoided altogether. To drastically oversimplify, wizards were born, witches were made. Though Madame Barrington was always vague when it came to wizard culture, Lily knew that not all children of wizards were wizards themselves. It was genetic, like eye or hair color. The stronger the wizard and the purer the blood, the better chance of passing on the gene, or whatever it was that enabled wizards to manipulate magic. So, being old, proper, and a traditionalist, Madame Barrington viewed witchcraft as disgraceful and lowly, not to mention dangerous. Only shameless fools with no true ability engaged in such activities. Sebastian's view was, since he couldn't be a wizard, he might as well do something. And anyway, he made a very good witch. Lily happened to agree with Sebastian, but never said so to her mentor. It took adept social skills, a clever nature, charisma, and a force of will to live such a life and come out on top. She would make a dreadful witch, as evidenced by how terrible she was at interacting with anyone except the few friends, or annoying acquaintances in the case of Sebastian, with whom she was comfortable. The ease with which Sebastian glided around social situations made her quite jealous. He was everything she wasn't, handsome, confident, popular, and good at whatever he put his mind to, though he rarely put his mind to anything unless absolutely necessary. For, as it turned out, he was also lazy, untidy, and undisciplined. He would have made a terrible wizard. Putting a note of briskness in her voice, she did have paperwork to go through after all, Lily fixed Sebastian with a stare and asked more firmly, "What do you want, Sebastian? I know you're up to something."
Well, it sounds terrible when you put it like that,
he said, grinning. "Sebastian," she said in a warning tone.
Okay, I'll get to the point. You're no fun.
Sebastian raised his hands in surrender, muttering the last part, disgruntled. "I have plenty of fun. It's called reading books."
Uh-huh, right.
Now it was Sebastian's turn to roll his eyes.
Anyway, I need your consulting services.
"You mean you need my help?" Lily asked sweetly, the start of a smug grin pulling at her lips.
No, I need you as a consultant. One professional to another.
Putting his coin away, he straightened in the chair, smiling and spreading his hands wide in a disarming gesture. It was obviously meant to reassure her, but she was not impressed. "Really? Professional? Since when are you a professional witch?" Sebastian adopted an indignant look.
Since a while. Can't you just see it? Sebastian Blackwell, professional witch,
he said dramatically, lifting his arm to paint an imaginary sign in the air.
I have business cards and everything.
His hand dove into the back pocket of his jeans and produced a rather bent card, which he flipped onto her desk with a flick of his wrist. "Fascinating," Lily commented, voice fairly dripping with amused sarcasm as she examined the card. The front showed a headshot of Sebastian, handsome without trying, as usual, beside his name and contact details printed in an overly curly font. The back had a stylized monogram in purple and gold. "And what services do you offer as a professional witch?" she asked, fighting the urge to laugh.
Oh, casting out evil spirits, contacting loved ones who've passed on, consulting the fates, various potions. You know, the normal stuff superstitious rich people believe in.
"Charlatanry, you mean?" Lily asked, eyebrow raised again.
Hey, I can actually do most of the stuff people ask for. When they want something impossible, like talking to their dead pet parrot or predicting the lottery, I make something up to keep them happy. Ignorance is bliss and all that. No harm done.
Lily gave him a hard stare over her glasses. She hated that saying. Ignorance was one of the least blissful things in the world, in her opinion. She believed that the truth will make you free, a saying which was carved into the rafters of McCain Library's grand reading hall. But she reminded herself that Sebastian wasn't her problem and got back to the point. "So what do you need my consulting services for?"
Well, I got hired for this job, see? And I've run across something more up your alley than mine.
"Is that so?" Her tone remained disinterested. She'd been pulled into too many of his wild schemes not to be hesitant. Though, to be fair, she'd egged him on in many of those schemes, whenever there was knowledge to be had or a new spell to try. Curiosity often got the better of her, and Sebastian knew it.
Yes, it is so.
"Explain."
I was hired to cast out this evil spirit, and it turns out the spirit isn't evil. He's actually a pretty nice guy. The real culprit is a spell put on the house almost 100 years ago because of some jilted lover. The spirit has stayed behind to warn people away from the house ever since. So, even though he has technically been haunting the house, even if I get him to go away, that doesn't fix the problem. And I won't get my money.
Let me guess. You need me to come figure out what the spell is and get rid of it, right?
A very astute conclusion. I'll give you an award later.
Sebastian gave her a lazy smile and a wink. Lily was not amused. You know, you really shouldn't insult the person you're asking help from, she said, giving him a level stare. And I still haven't heard any compelling reason why I should help you.
Yes. Well...
Sebastian backpedaled a bit. Lily knew his good looks and charming ways usually got him what he needed, so she took delight in giving him as much trouble as possible. A very small part of her liked to watch him squirm. Well, maybe not so small a part.
Besides help, consulting, for the sake of our professional friendship, there's a collection of occult books in the house, which the owner has agreed to give me as part of the payment. I would, of course, hand them over to you, should you provide the aforementioned consultation thingy.
Despite her better judgment, Lily's interest was piqued. New books did that to her. She could never resist learning new things. And if these were genuine books on magic, not silly mumbo-jumbo written by someone who thought they were a wizard, they could be valuable indeed. She was always looking to add to the basement's collection, not to mention expand her personal library. Still mulling over the possibility of new books, she caught sight of Sebastian's smug smile. She frowned. It annoyed her to be so predictable, but sometimes it couldn't be helped. Sebastian knew her well enough to guess what was going on in her head. He knew that as soon as he mentioned books, he'd already won. After a few more moments of silence, just to make him sweat, Lily finally nodded. Fine, I'll help. And wipe that smug grin off your face, Mr. Blackwell. Those books had better be the real thing, or I'll have a word with your great aunt about all this professional witch nonsense. Sebastian paled slightly at her threat, but covered it with a shrug and a laugh.
As if the old bat could disdain my existence any more than she already does.
If I were you, I'd be more worried about what else she might do besides disdain it. Now when can we look at this house? I'm not going to shuffle around my work schedule for you.
Why not now?
Sebastian asked, rising and bowing smoothly, arm outstretched towards the door. Where is it? Lily asked, considering.
South, past Fort Benning. It's on the Chattahoochee River, a bit north of Eufaula, Alabama, before the river runs into the reservoir. About a 2.5-hour drive. If we leave now, we can spend a few hours poking around the house and have you back home by dinner time.
Lily glanced at her watch. It was 1 o'clock. Her failed date with Jerry felt like years ago already, though it had only been an hour. Despite herself, the prospect of an unknown malignant spell, and new books to explore, was too tempting to delay. All right, let's do it, she said, standing up from her desk and moving to collect her purse. You'll have to meet me at my apartment first, though. I need to change and get a few supplies. She was still wearing the pretty blue blouse, dark pencil skirt, and high heels she'd donned for her date.
Sure thing, Lil.
Sebastian tipped an imaginary hat and started for the door. How many times do I have to tell you? Lily began, exasperated, but he was already out the door and down the hall. Don't call me that, she finished in a subdued tone. Sighing, she gathered her things and followed him out, locking her office behind her.